for being here. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that oftentimes when you go to a presentation or a workshop by a financial planner, there's often like an agenda where they're trying to, promote something or try to get clients. And I want you to let you know that I don't do that. I don't sell anything, and nor do I even work with people as individual clients. I work for a company called Financial Finesse that educates employees of our client companies to help people make better financial decisions. So there's no bias here. There's no hidden agenda or anything like that. So just wanted to let you be aware of that, in case that was something in the back of your mind. So this topic is really timely because, I don't even know how many of you make New Year's resolutions. I think so many of us have just kind of given up on that idea. But for people that do, one of the most common topics is finances, right? People wanting to really turn their financial lives around, and especially with everything that's happened over the last couple of years. So what I really want to do is hone in on the things that you all as an audience are most interested in. And so rather than going through, a whole formal PowerPoint like I've done in the past, I'll use the slides, as they apply to the questions, but I'd really love to start with the questions that you have submitted before this presentation. And then as I'm going through, if you think of other questions, definitely keep submitting them. And we want to make this, as Christina said, as interactive as possible. And so with that, Christina, what was the first question?
Yeah, I love this. So one of the first questions that was submitted before this event was, what is one overarching piece of advice or theme you share with your clients when developing their financial plan?
So one of the big misconceptions people have about financial planning is that it's about someone like me, a financial planner, telling you what to do with your money. And some people don't go to financial planners because they don't want that. And other people have this expectation that I'll just go and they'll just tell me exactly what to do. And it's neither of those. Financial planning is really about you taking control over your money and making sure it matches what is important to you. Now, there are some situations where there's clearly a right and a wrong answer. I'm not going to say that doesn't exist, but so much of it is about, what is important to you. I live here in New York City. I know people who, they just spend a huge percentage of their income on rent. And that's okay because maybe they spend a lot less on something else. Or some people love to spend a lot on travel. And so they'll spend less money in a different area. There's no right or wrong decision. What's important is that you understand the consequences of the different options that you have so that you can make the right decision for you. And I hope you're going to be able to see that as we go through, trying to help you understand the different options available to you and making it about you. Don't worry about, these rules of thumb that everybody should do, because none of us are a rule of thumb, right? We're all different. We all have unique situations and goals.
The second question that we have is, what are some financial tips to help with everyday spending? What's something you wish you knew 10 years ago?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And this is a situation where I'll show some of these PowerPoint slides that we have here, because no matter what your goal is, being able to control your spending is going to be a key part of that. And again, it's all about making your money follow you and your values. So I would say the first thing is to know where your money is going now. And a lot of times when people have never looked at their expenses, they're just shocked to find they're spending money in areas they had no idea they were spending it. So ideally, you'd look at a whole year's worth of expenses. But if I said that, I know most people just wouldn't do it. So take a look at 3 months, of your bank and credit card statements to get an average, right, over that 3-month period of where you spent money. The only thing is, anytime that you took cash, and I know, so many of us don't even really use cash as much anymore, but if you do, if you took money out of an ATM, you're not necessarily going to know where that went. So that's going to be one little thing. I could tell you what I do for that is I just know that the only thing I ever spent cash on is eating out for a place that just doesn't take a credit card, or if I'm splitting bill and we don't feel like throwing in a bunch of credit cards or Venmoing each other or anything like that. So I just assume everything I took in cash was part of my eating out expense. And then for non-monthly expenses like trips, the holidays, which we just went through, it's a big cause of people running up debt. So estimate what you think you're going to spend over a year and then divide that number by 12 so that you can turn that into a monthly expense. And then you could see how it fits in with everything else that you're spending. There's also a lot of apps now that people use. If there's any you particularly like, feel free to share them in the chat. I know the most popular is Mint, which is free, and it just connects to all your different bank accounts and credit card accounts. And as you spend money, it'll track those expenses for you. So that's the first step, right? Figuring out where your money's going. And then once you know that, try to figure out how to make your spending match your values, like what's important to you. And a lot of this is just being conscious of our money. It's not necessarily even that complicated. So like the first thing for each expense, is this something you even need or want? And for example, how many of us sign up for subscriptions to things we don't even like, especially with all these streaming things that we don't even watch anymore? Maybe it was for like a show that's like we binged already and we still are getting charged by that company. Or maybe it's like membership to a gym that you thought you'd go to and now you find you really won't. And maybe it really doesn't make sense to maintain that. Not that you shouldn't work out, but maybe there are other ways to do that, right? So those are the easy wins to start with, right? Getting rid of those things that you don't even want. The second is for those things that you do want, is there a way to get it at a lower cost? So this is the whole thing of shopping around. Some people get really into couponing. I'll admit, I pretty much never use coupons. That's why I say it's really about what makes sense for you. I like to really hone in on those monthly expenses and getting them down as low as possible. Like I will shop around on like cell phone plans. I know I was spending over $100 a month on Verizon and I just switched to their prepaid and it's like $30 a month. So that was like an easy savings because I'm using the same network. The same thing with insurance policies. If you have auto insurance, when you bought your car, the company that gave you the best deal at that time may not be the company that gives you the best deal now. So it's shopping around, especially for those things that aren't really much of a sacrifice. And then also negotiating. You'd be surprised by how many of your bills are negotiable. Just finding out other details. Are there discounts you're eligible for? There are even bill negotiation services, like bill cutters with a Z and bill fixers. They'll negotiate your bills for you. And basically they keep 40 to 50% of whatever they save you. But that means you can do it yourself and keep 100% of the savings. But if you're just not going to do that, or if you have done it, no harm in using one of those services to see if they can squeeze out any more savings for you. And if that's not enough to reach your goals, ask yourself, what are you willing to give up to reach your goals? And again, this is where your values and priorities come in. So if you just graduated, from school, maybe it means, I know this is not pleasant for a lot of people, but maybe it means living at home a little bit longer, or if you're in a studio, staying there a little longer before you upgrade, or living with roommates a little bit longer. Maybe it means cutting back on eating out, or cutting back on travel until you're in a better place. And better place is different for everyone, right? Maybe you're trying to get out of debt, or you're trying to save to buy a home, whatever that can be. So it's really just about being conscious with your money. And these are some examples of how much someone can save. And these are actual studies that have found how much people were able to save on average by shopping around for insurance, switching cell phone plans, dropping unused subscriptions, cutting their cable cord, which is becoming more popular now, and negotiating bills. And you can see it's over $250 a month that you might be able to free up just in these examples. And I think the other part of the question was, what do I wish I knew 10 years ago? Honestly, if I can go back 10 years ago, I wish I knew, all the best performing stocks, over the last 10 years, that I could put all my money in that. But unfortunately, that's not an option. And we're always dealing with uncertainty. So, I don't have any particular thing, I guess I would say, that I knew 10 years ago. I was still a financial planner. So it's like, not that much, but I would really focus again on this idea of sticking to the basics of a lot of the things that we'll talk about today.
Thanks. Though it's actually really helpful to know that you can maybe save up to like $250 a month if you just revisit some of the things. So the next question we have is, what are some good practices when saving for multiple large goals at once, be it retirement, housing, children, school, etc.? This is actually very relevant for me.
No, this is a huge
How can you
question.
afford it all?
How can you afford it all? It's similar to looking at your different expenses and prioritizing again based on values, right? That's what it really just keeps coming back to. So I'm going to come back to some of these, but for most financial planners would say, so I'm going to give you some guidelines and then show you where your life might be different. So financial planners will typically say, like, the most important thing is to have some money set aside for emergencies, even if it's just $1,000. Probably a good thing to do so that if you run into a tight situation, you don't have to worry about not being able to pay bills on time and things like that. Now, an exception might be, if you realistically, maybe for some people, their emergency fund is the bank of mom and dad, not necessarily ideal situation, but when you're first getting started, maybe realistic, right? And so maybe then you want to tackle other goals first, like debt. But in general, I think for most people, they're going to want to have some money set aside for emergencies. Second thing is make sure you're putting enough in whatever retirement plan you have at work to get the full match that they're giving you. That's part of your benefits that you're working for. So you don't want to leave any of that free money on the table. So if they're going to match like the first 5% of your income that you put in your 401k, that would probably be a very high priority. Again, unless you're really struggling to pay bills or something like that, because it's hard to beat that type of return on your money anywhere else. The next thing might be trying to tackle any high interest debt that you have. And by high interest, if you have debt where the interest rate is more than 4 to 6%, like credit cards are the perfect example of this. Because if you're paying 18, 19, 20% or more on credit cards, it's really hard to put your money somewhere that's going to get you a better return than what you would save in interest by paying that debt down. So that would probably be also a pretty important priority, probably for most people. Now, where it gets interesting is when the debt is actually very low interest. Like if you bought a home outside of the last couple of years, you were fortunate enough to probably lock in a pretty low interest rate. If your interest rate is lower than 4%, it may not make sense to actually pay that down early, right? You could probably earn more by investing those savings than you would save in interest by paying that debt down. If you have debts that are between 4 to 6%, like I know a lot of student loans are in that category, it's a personal choice. If you're more conservative, you may prefer to pay that debt down. If you're more of an aggressive investor, you may prefer to make minimum payments and focus on saving and investing that money instead. So again, it's going to come down to a personal decision. Now, let's say you don't have high interest debt. I think for a lot of people, if you don't own a home, that's probably the most common goal that people are next trying to shoot for. And so just trying to save as much as you can for the down payment and closing costs, for many people might be their next priority. And if you do own a home, or if you plan to never buy a home, then it comes to saving for long-term goals like retirement, or like I like to say financial independence, getting to a point where you work because you want to, or maybe you don't work, not because you have to, right? So I'm going to skip over some of this debt stuff unless you guys have questions on that. And building up your emergency fund, by the way, so it's not just that $1,000, but ideally you would have enough to cover like 3 to 6 months of necessary expenses, so that if you were between jobs for whatever reason, whether it's a layoff or whether you want to, you're in a bad work situation and you want to be able to walk away, what my boss likes to call FU money, that you can continue to pay your bills, right? And necessities until you get a new job. And for most people, that's going to be probably in that 3 to 6 months range, right? For some people, you might want even more than that. And then retirement or financial independence is where you have enough so that you never have to work again. if you don't want to. And I'd suggest running a retirement calculator to see how much to save for that goal. So so this is all like your long-term goals. And basically what you want to do is weigh that against your immediate spending. And it's a trade-off, right? So if you want to spend more now on eating out and trips, maybe that means you delay buying a home a little bit longer, or you buy a home that's not as expensive, or maybe you retire later or with less income. Notice, no right or wrong, no judgment on this. It's purely about what makes sense for you. I know people that save a huge percentage of their income because they want to be able to retire super early. And I know people that also don't save that much and they're willing, to work until maybe they sometimes people really love their jobs and they don't see themselves ever retiring and they want to enjoy that money now. And that's also okay, as long as, again, you're understanding the consequences. What's the next question, Christine?
Yeah, so the next question we have is, what are some tips on breaking down short-term versus long-term goals, investment strategies for each?
Yeah, so we talked about some goals here, like building up an emergency fund, saving for a home, and saving for retirement. The main thing here is any money that you may need in the next, let's say, 5 years, you probably want to keep that money super safe. Why? Because as we just saw last year, the stock market goes up, but it also comes down. And when it does, all of a sudden that money that you had to buy a home, and now you may not have enough anymore, and you may need to delay that goal. Or even if you have enough, you may be forced to sell some of those investments at a loss. So good rule of thumb is that, if you think you may need the money next 5 years, especially your emergency fund, but maybe buying your home fund, keep that someplace safe, like a savings account, maybe a CD. I-bonds have become a really popular option now because they pay a lot of interest and they don't really have much of any risk. Just know with an I-bond, you can't cash them in the first 12 months. But those are all really good, safe investments for short-term. For long-term money, like retirement, or for saving for like a young child's college fund, that's where we can afford to be more aggressive with our investments and investing more in things like stocks that can probably earn more in the long run, but in the short run, they're going to be more volatile.
That's great. And then for the next question, what we have is, what should we know about 401k being maxed out every year? What is the legal amount and how much do you sort of recommend putting in?
Yeah, so actually, I just realized that these numbers are a little dated. This is from last year. So the most you can put in is actually now $22,500, or $30,000 if you're turning 50 or older this year. So that's the maximum you can put into a 401k or a 403b. But that doesn't mean it makes sense for everyone to max it, right? So this is going to come back to priorities again. First of all, if you have debt that you're trying to pay off, if you're trying to save for a home, maybe just put enough to get that match, right? To get the full match, so you get that free money. Once you're at it, you've built your foundation, meaning you have an emergency fund you're comfortable with, you've paid off any high interest debt, and let's say you bought a home, then you're really thinking more long-term. I would say, run a retirement calculator, and something I can share maybe with people we can send afterwards. I can send you a link to a retirement calculator that you can use so that you can see how much to save for whatever goals you have, like the age you'd like to be financially independent, how much income you want, and then you'll be able to see how much to save. Now, if you can afford to do more than that, and you just want to max it out so you're getting the full tax benefit, because there are big tax benefits from your 401k, that's okay too, right? So once again, there's a whole range of ways of looking at it, depending on your situation and what your goals are.
Thanks. And then the next question we have are, what are some ways to take advantage of tax benefits, speaking of tax benefits, with a Roth IRA?
Yeah, so let me come a little bit here now. We're going to skip over these. So just being aware, there are two different types of IRAs. There's a traditional and a Roth. So with the Roth IRA, the way it works is you don't get any tax benefit now when you put money into an Roth IRA. It doesn't reduce your taxes now. However, after 5 years and 59 and a half, whichever is longer, all of the earnings in that account can come out tax-free. So it's like you're giving yourself a future tax break when you put money into a Roth IRA. That's the main benefit. But the second benefit of a Roth IRA is that unlike a lot of these other retirement accounts, like your 401k or a traditional IRA, whatever you put into a Roth IRA, you can take out anytime you want, no tax, no penalty. So if I put $6,000 in a Roth IRA, I can take $6,000 out tomorrow, no tax, no penalty. Now, if my 6,000 grows to 7,000, okay, so if I have an extra $1,000 of earnings in there and I take that money out and I take the earnings out, I'll probably have to pay tax and a 10% penalty on the earnings. But the good news is your contributions always come out first. So you always have access to the contributions. And that's great because this way, if you need that money in an emergency, you can even think of it as part of your emergency fund. Although if it is, you probably want to keep that money in savings until you have enough emergency money someplace else. And then you can take that Roth IRA money and invest it more aggressively for retirement. You can also think of it as money you can use to buy a home. Because not only can you take the contributions out, if you're using it for a first-time home purchase, you can take up to $10,000 of earnings out with no penalty. And if you've had the account for 5 years, it's all tax-free too. So also good for that. Also for education expenses, like if you want to go back to school at some point, then again, you can always take out the contributions, but the earnings can also come out for education with no penalty. So the Roth IRA is just a super flexible account that you can use for so many things.
That does sound really exciting to be able to kind of use this tool. Another, like speaking of ways of which to invest and have savings, what are some of the other best ways to invest and have savings, maybe earlier on in your career?
Yeah, so early on in your career, you're probably first going to be building that foundation, building your emergency fund, saving if you want to buy a home. So a lot of that is going to be super safe, in cash. Savings accounts, CDs, things like that. However, for your long-term money, like retirement accounts, this is where you can be very aggressive and benefit from the fact that stocks do really well in the long run, even if they're not going to do well, maybe right now. And in fact, when stocks are low, it's good if you're buying, right? Because you're actually buying them at low prices. So the easiest way to do that is what's called a target date fund. And the way a target date fund works is all you do, and almost every 401k plan has these now, they're super popular, but you can also get them in IRAs and other places, is you just pick the one with the year that's closest to when you think you're going to retire. Let me see if I can find a slide on this while I'm doing that. And then you can put all of your money into that one fund because it's going to divide your money into lots of different investments. So it's fully diversified. And then it'll gradually and automatically get more conservative as you get closer to that target retirement date. So it just makes it really simple. Like you can put all your money in one fund. You can find one with very low costs, a lot cheaper than going to a financial advisor, and they do all the work for you. So if I look here, you could see when it comes to investing, ways of making sure you're diversified. You can see target date funds are there. Model portfolios are also available that you can follow. And of course, if you have a complex situation, especially if you have a lot of investments in a taxable account, then that's where an investment advisor might be able to be beneficial.
That's very interesting. And speaking, I guess, of like saving with target dates in the long term, how do you stay motivated for the long-term strategy game of money? How do you motivate yourself after a pitfall or maybe any kind of emergency spending?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if you run, I guess the question is really about when things aren't going so well, right? Which is going to happen from time to time, staying motivated. I think a lot of it is about expectations, because I tell people right up front, life is going to throw things at you. It will. It's going to happen in your investment portfolio, guaranteed practically, that you're going to see multiple declines, like big ones, like we've seen this year, and probably you're going to have some bigger ones. So know in advance that that's going to happen. And the investing one is actually, to me, the easiest in many ways, because it doesn't actually affect your life. What I would say is don't even look at it. Don't even look at your accounts, right? Don't be tempted, because if you do, you might, find yourself, selling out, or maybe you want to stop putting money in, even though when the market's down, that's actually a time when you want to be buying. So there's that. In terms of the more difficult ones, right? The things that happen in our life, it could be, like a loss of a job, something else happened. You have a huge expense, like a big medical bill or something like that. I wish I could say there's an easy, way to get around it. It's more, to me, just about knowing in advance that those things are going to happen and having that plan, right? And that's the whole reason we build up an emergency fund, because we know these things are going to happen, and just expecting them to, but also knowing that, these things are temporary. Like, my favorite saying, what is the idea that this too shall pass. That this is like the one thing they say is always true in every situation. This too shall pass. And it means that for both the good times and the bad. So when times are good, the good times are not going to last forever. And that's why we get insurance. We have estate planning documents. We, have an emergency fund. But the bad times are not going to last forever either, right? The market eventually comes back. You find another job. You get through paying off debt. And so, just realizing that just like the stock market is ups and downs, life is also up and downs, and just really kind of focus on that long run. And I think so much of life is about expectations, and just when you expect it, I think it's not going to affect you as much as when you don't expect something.
It's really good advice to stay motivated. The last question that we had submitted before this started was, do you have any financial news sources that you recommend or prefer to read, primarily for general market news?
So I'll say something that might surprise people, and that is my actual advice on that is not to look at market news. And I'll tell you why. There's two reasons. Some financial advisors like to call it investment porn. When they're talking about what the market's doing day to day, it is really hard, if not virtually impossible, to translate what you see in the news into something that's actually going to help your investment portfolio. Most experts that are trained in this stuff, with Ivy League degrees and, fancy MBAs and all this, even they generally do not do better than if you just buy like an index fund that just tracks the market. And that's what people are doing this for a living full time. So the idea that you'll be able to watch the news or read something and be able then to outperform in the long run, is just highly unlikely. But I look at this as good news, because I remember when I first learned about this concept, for me, it was liberation, because I'm not someone, even though I do this for a living, I'm not someone that likes enjoy reading and watching about the stock market. I know many of you probably feel the same way. So you can now feel that you're not actually missing anything. The people out there that are doing that are not actually getting any advantage over you. What's nice about investing to me is that it's really easy, because it's really just about, having a diversified portfolio. And there's so many ways of doing that are really easy, like the target date funds. That's the easiest of all. Keeping your costs as low as possible, and then just holding on for the long run. That's it. So I would try to stay away from market news. Now, having said that, there are resources you can use if you just want to learn more about financial planning in general. Now, I'm going to be, very, very shameless here for a moment and plug hold on one second if I can actually do this. Yeah, so there's a book that, here we go. It's called What Your Financial Advisor Isn't Telling You. This was actually written by the CEO of the company I work for. That's why I said it's shameless. I also helped write the book and contributed to it. So because of that, I know I agree with everything in it. I'm not saying it's like the greatest book that's ever been. I think it's actually a really good book, but at least I know there's nothing in there I don't agree with. But it's a really good book that covers, the full gamut of like, how do you build a budget? How do you pay off debt, investing, different retirement accounts? And actually, funny enough, the author, Liz Davidson, again, the CEO of our company, is coming out with a new book called Money Strong as well. That's a follow-up to this book. So that's one resource. So, and also for those people who want a deeper dive, particularly in investing, another book I'd recommend that has nothing to do with my employer is a book called, this one's more technical. It's called Global Asset Allocation by Meb Faber. And he actually has a podcast as well. Now, what I love about this book is by looking at this book called Global Asset Allocation, I know it's the most boring title you can imagine, but this book actually reviews like tons of other books that were written about investing, like all these books that you've probably seen and heard of. And what Meb finds when he looks at all of the recommendations in these books is he actually compares them. And what he finds is that over like a 30 to 40 year period, it didn't actually matter whose advice you followed. You ended up in about the same place. Now, year to year, some of them did better than others, but at the end of it all, it didn't really make a difference. And that's really the key thing to understand, is that as long as you are reasonably diversified, you're probably going to end up in the same place as everybody else. And that's a good place because in the long run, these investments do grow. The key thing is that you keep your fees as low as possible, because paying like a 1% fee on a mutual fund every year can really hurt your returns over the long run. Okay, that's not something you're going to notice in the short term, but those things really add up. And then the second thing is yourself. The biggest enemy you have in investing is probably ourselves. Look at yourself in the mirror, because what happens, and this studies have been found on this, what people will often do is instead of leaving it alone, they'll go in there and they'll see something in the news, they'll panic, they'll pull their money out, or they'll want to be super aggressive and put everything in like crypto or something like that. And maybe it does well for some period of time, but eventually it crashes and they pull money out and then they don't want to invest anymore. And all of that stuff hurts people's returns more than anything. So the whole point of it is just, have a diversified portfolio, keep your costs low, and whatever it is that you decide to do, just try to stick with it is really the key thing. And that's why, again, I'm not trying to push a particular news source, because I don't think you need to even do that. There was a question, by the way, that someone just submitted saying, what is the best place to buy I bonds? So this is an easy one to answer, because really there's only one place to buy I bonds. I know I mentioned those, and I'll talk a little bit more about what they are, but I bonds are issued directly by the federal government. They're actually a form of US government savings bonds, and you can get them at Treasury Direct. So I'm going to show you this website, and I'll also tell you a little bit more about I bonds, because there's a lot of cool stuff about them. So let's make this screen. Okay, so this is treasurydirect.gov. Now, I know it looks like a website from the 90s. It's a government site. So that, the thing is, they're not necessarily trying to sell stuff and trying to get business. So it is, not, I've often heard people complain about that, but this is where you can go to actually get I bonds. So if we go to savings bonds, and then go to the About Savings Bonds section, this is where you could actually learn more about I bonds, and you can see right now they're paying 6.89, and that's why they've been so talked about. They were actually paying a bit more a few months ago. And the reason the interest rate is that high is because the interest rate is tied to inflation. And as you've probably noticed, inflation has been really high recently. And so the interest rate on those I bonds is really high. Now, what makes the I bonds cool is the fact that they're fully backed by the federal government. So almost no risk of default, although who knows with this whole debt ceiling situation. But in general, it's considered the safest type of bond you can get. But unlike other Government bonds, they don't go up and down in price. So you don't have to worry about them going down in value the way you would with a regular treasury bond. Now, the interest rate does change every 6 months. So you'll notice, you see right here, it says this interest rate is good until April 30th, and then it'll adjust again based on interest rates. So that rate may come down if inflation comes down. The other thing to be aware of is that you cannot cash them in the first 12 months at all. So not good as part of your emergency fund unless you've had them for over a year. If you cash them out in the first 5 years, you lose the last 3 months of interest, but that's still going to leave you a lot more than you would by keeping your money in a savings account. You're still ahead, even if you lose 3 months of interest, just because the rate is so much higher. The other thing is that you can only get up to $10,000 a year, plus another $5,000 if you use tax refunds. Like, something people don't notice, when you get a refund, it actually asks you, do you just want this money in cash? And most of us are like, yes, I want the cash. But you can also choose to get it in a form of a savings bond, including an I bond. So that's another way to get more of these I bonds, up to $5,000 a year. That way, plus $10,000 at treasurydirect.gov. So we answered that one. Yeah, so what I want to hear is just we have about 15 minutes left. I would love to hear what other questions people have. If there's anything I said that sounded a little confusing, or maybe something we didn't get a chance to cover, really, what is on your mind? Apologize, by the way, I guess there was a period of time there I thought I was showing my screen and I wasn't. But so this is the treasurydirect.gov website that you're seeing right now. All right, question. What do you think of the stock market? That is a very broad question. It's a great question. What do I think of the stock market? The current stock market. Okay. So this goes back to what I said earlier, where I don't even like to speculate on what the market is doing now or what it's going to do in the short run. So I would say the stock market is actually relatively predictable over long periods of time, decades, but very unpredictable over short periods of time. And I literally mean unpredictable, which means I pretty much ignore anyone who tells me what they think the stock market's going to do in the short run. Because if someone was actually able to be really good at predicting that, they would be like the most successful investor that's ever been alive. Because again, all these hedge fund managers and other big money managers, they don't really have a great track record themselves of being able to time the market. So I think it's something I could maybe speculate, but I don't know how useful that is. And I think maybe that's the real message, right? Is not to even think about what you think the market's going to do in the short run, and to just think of it as a long-term goal. Do I think the stock market will be higher than it is today in 20, 30, or 40 years? Almost definitely, unless we end the world in a nuclear war with Russia or something like that, right? But short of a catastrophe, yeah, the stock market will probably be a lot higher than it is in the long run. What it's going to do tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, even the next few years, nobody really knows. But that's the risk you take. And that's why, if you need the money in the short run, don't even put it in the stock market, so that you're not even having to think about. All right, there's another question that came in. Is the $10,000 max per person or per household / tax return? Also, is it every year for the I bond? Oh, great question. Because I should have specified that is per year and per person. So if you have a household, right, you could get 10,000 for yourself, 10,000 for your spouse, 10,000 also for children. You can open them in a minor's name. So you can get one for each child, and you can do that every year. So that means that you could probably put a lot more than you may have thought. Yes. So great question. It's not a lifetime $10,000 limit, because that would be a real bummer. What other questions do people have? We got just a little over 10 minutes.
I think Erik might be frozen.
I think you're right. But I didn't see any other questions come through. Natalie, you mentioned the question of, can you take out the interest, not the principal? I don't know if Erik had a chance to answer that in particular, but if not, maybe he can follow up with you directly. Christina, you shared a couple of upcoming programs that the New York Torero Club has in the pipeline. Would you mind telling us what the New York Club has in mind for 2023?
I would love to. So for upcoming events that we do have, we have in April a Welcome to the East Coast event where we love to connect current people who are in the New York City area with those who are seeking to come to New York City, as daunting as it might be to move to the concrete jungle. And it's a great way for us to be able to connect and to be able to tell you not only what is going on within the city, but if you're looking for a job, connecting with each other, leveraging our great network. What I actually find is that in New York, we're actually so much more eager to help each other because there's like so much lesser of us, I guess, even though there's still a really great amount of us here in the New York City area. I think there's about 1,200, right?
There actually are, and they're all, for the most part, in the boroughs as well. And I'd love to hear from the audience. Now that we've got Erik back so he can wrap up here shortly. Who from the audience is actually from the New York area? Or maybe just put in the chat where you're actually from. So I'd love to know if we have a lot of New Yorkers with us tonight. Oh, we've got San Francisco. All right. Connecticut.
Nice.
Neighbor. Oh, Natalie's got her eyes set on that concrete jungle.
You should join the East Coast event.
Right?
Totally.
All right, perfect. Erik, I'm going to bounce it back over to you so you can wrap up. And then when you're done, I have an exit slide to share with everyone to thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, first of all, for I don't know what happened there to my internet connection, but obviously I'm back now. But I don't know if I missed any questions or anything that came in. But if not, then I just kind of want to leave you with the idea that, number one, that financial planning is very personal. And so if you hear things, you have to really think about whether they apply to you. And everyone's situation is different. And number two, and this came up a lot with the investing thing, not being so distracted by all the noise and talk about what's going to happen in the market, because no one really knows. And the media, talks about that stuff because it generates ratings. Okay, that's the reality of it. And I hate to, say it, but financial advisors love to talk about that too, because it's how they get business, right? If they can convince you they know what the market's going to do, then you're more likely to invest in them. The reality is nobody really knows how to do that. So it's just, again, being reasonably diversified, keeping costs low, sticking with your plan. I had a question came in. Can you take out the interest, not the principal? So I'm sorry, take the interest from what? If you can clarify that question. I-bonds. Okay. Not really, because the way that I-bond actually works, it accrues interest in the sense that it increases in value. So, and also I'm not sure what the advantage would be of taking out the interest but not the principal, because you do have to pay the tax on the interest as it accrues, or you can defer the tax until you cash out the I-bond. So yeah, I don't know that there would be a value to that. I mean, I guess in one way you can, because if you've had I-bonds for a while and they've accrued a lot of interest, I guess you could cash out, a dollar amount equal to the interest. Yeah. Okay. In case you need the money. Right. So you don't have to take it all out at once, I guess is really the real way to answer that question. You can decide to redeem, some of it and not all of it in case you need it. So it's not like an all or nothing proposition. So you can see why they've been so popular over the last few years. because it does give you a lot of safety. You know, the interest rate is pretty high, at least right now. And so, you know, that is something that people have been, you know, trying to make sure they get before. I know at the end of the year, there was a huge rush. In fact, it crashed the website of people trying to get I bonds before the end of the year. Anything else? Any other last questions before I turn it back to Kara and Christina? Okay.
All right.
Oh, wait, there was thoughts about investing in real estate at this point in time. That is a great question because I actually do a lot in real estate. So it's a big question, actually. The thing about investing in real estate, and when I ask this, I assume that you mean direct real estate. That means buying a property that you own, not investing through what's called a REIT, a real estate investment trust, which is almost more similar to buying stock in a real estate company. So if you're buying investment real estate, understand it's a little bit like starting your own business for all the good and all the bad that involves. So for someone who likes to be active with investing, because I've been spending this whole time saying, don't do it with the stock market, real estate is an area where you are rewarded for doing research, because there's a lot of inefficiencies in the market. So there's a lot of opportunities to find good deals and also to add value, you know, by fixing up properties, by managing them well yourself, or if you maintain a property, if you do your own tenant management, especially if you could do like a lot of your own repairs, you could save a lot of money on that. So there's a huge opportunity for you to actively add value to real estate. Now, for some people, though, that's a reason not to do it. They don't want to deal with the hassle of real estate. So if you don't want that hands-on investment, that's a reason not to do it. Second thing is that real estate is often seen as a low-risk investment, but I think it's the opposite. I think it's a high-risk, high-return. The reason is leverage. So much of the value of real estate is the fact that you borrow money to buy real estate. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say, I'm just going to make the math simple. I know it's really hard to find a home $100,000, but let's say you did. Let's say you bought a home that was worth $100,000 and you put down $20,000, 20%. And let's say that home goes up only 2% in value. So now it's worth $102,000. But you know what? That $2,000 appreciation is 10% of the $20,000 you put down. So even though the property only went up 2%, you made 10% profit. So you can't compare the growth of real estate to the growth of stocks because the actual return on your dollars can be a lot higher. Now, here is the flip side of that. The flip side of it is that real estate can actually cost you more money than you put in, right? If it goes down in value, you can end up owing money on the mortgage. If you have tenants that, you know, don't pay their rent, you could be forced to put money into it. The same thing if you have a lot of maintenance costs, a lot of repair costs. So you got to be prepared to put a lot of money into it. So even if you buy a stock and it goes to zero, at least you didn't lose more than you put in. With a real estate, you could actually be forced to put more money into it. So I think of it as a high risk, high return investment. I mean, right now, real estate isn't honestly as attractive as it was before, simply because interest rates are higher. So you're buying it, you know, with a high interest rate. Having said that, you know, inflation tends to be good for real estate. So if inflation continues, it can be good. And if you think of it as a long-term investment, it can still pay off in the long run. That's the most condensed answer I can give you on real estate. Okay.
I asked that
All right,
question.
I think we're out of time, so I'm turning it back to you, Kara and Christina.
That was my question, Eric, and it was a loaded one, so we'll have to talk later.
Great.
I want to join that because I'm also in the market for buying a house. So here we go. Well, thank you so much, Eric. We really appreciate you taking the time to share some of your awesome financial and wealth building tips to our fellow alumni community. I always look forward to this event because I kind of walk away with a new nugget of info like today will be I bonds. So thank you for all those who've listened in today. If you have any more questions for Eric, we can share out his email and you can feel free to reach out to him at any point in the future. And just so that you do know, we do have a couple of events coming up, as Kara and I were talking about previously. all the things that you see on the slide. There's a couple of events hosted by USD, but also local to New York, such as the April 12th Welcome to New York event. On the right, you'll see all the different events in the New York chapter, such as Pups and Pints, where we're going to go to a dog park and we have puppies. So what better than to come play with the puppies and socialize with each other? We have our Yankees versus Red Sox game in late August, as well as Oktoberfest in October, and our annual holiday event at the Galway Hooker in December. So please take a look at these events, register, and hope to kind of see you on the next event that we have together.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you, Erik. Emails are here in case you want to get a hold of these two, in case you need a hold of me. I'm all over the USD website for the Office of Alumni Relations. Everything listed here on the left is part of our Hire USD program. So at the beginning of every year, January, February, and March, we put out a lot of content and marketing about hiring USD Torero. So fellow USD alumni and students for entry-level positions, as well as internships. So check out our website for more information about Hire USD, and make sure to check out all of these really wonderful opportunities to connect, to build your own professional development, as well as learn additional information about hiring Torero talent. Take good care, everyone. Have a lovely night, and all my best from USD in San Diego.
Thanks, everyone.